big spaceship called New Horizon moved slowly through the dark space. It was like a floating the school and lab where people from different planets could work together. The ship had been traveling for many months, studying new worlds and testing how well aliens and humans could learn from each other. Dr. Sarah Winters sat at her desk, looking at pictures and notes about strange plants from faraway planets. She was thinking about her job as a teacher for the first group of alien students who had ever joined a human space mission. It was exciting but also very hard work. For months ago, Sarah had said yes to becoming a mentor for 3 young aliens from a planet called Athethra. These students were part of a new program to see if different species could study together in space. Everyone thought it would be easy, but it turned out to be much more difficult than anyone expected. "Dr. Winters," came a soft, musical voice from the door. Sarah looked up and saw Curl walking toward her. The young Athethran moved with smooth, careful steps. Her skin had a silver shine, and her ears were pointed. She was 16 years old in Athethran years, which made her as smart as a human college graduate. But since her people lived much longer than humans, she was still considered very young. "I finished the tests you asked me to do," Curl said. "The results show some strange patterns that we should talk about." "Great work, Curl," Sarah said with a smile. "What did you find in the plant samples?" "The plants and the dirt creatures work together in ways we've never seen before," Curl explained. "They use special energy waves to talk to each other and help each other survive." Curl had a special gift that most humans didn't have. She could feel the emotions and connections between living things. This made her very good at understanding how plants and animals work together, even when human machines couldn't detect these relationships. "Can you tell me what you felt when you studied the samples?" Sarah asked, taking notes. "I could sense that all the plants were connected underground," Curl said. "They share food and information with each other. It's like they're all part of one big family instead of just individual plants trying to survive alone." Sarah wrote down everything Curl said. Working with the young alien had taught her so much. Together, they discovered things that neither humans nor Athethrans could have found by themselves. "These discoveries will help us understand how life works on other planets," Sarah said. "Your special abilities give us information that our computers and tools can't detect." Curl's pointed ears moved slightly, which meant she was happy about the praise. But Sarah noticed that the young students seemed quieter and sadder than usual during their work sessions. "Dr. Winters," Curl said carefully, "can I ask you something about how humans handle long trips in space? My teachers on Athethra didn't tell me everything about the mental problems that can happen when you're away from your home planet for so long." This question made Sarah worry. It sounded like Curl was having troubles that went beyond just learning new subjects. Athethran culture made it hard for students to talk directly about emotional problems, especially with their teachers. "Space travel affects different species in different ways," Sarah said gently. "What parts of being on this ship are making things difficult for you?" "My people need to feel connected to others to stay mentally healthy," Curl explained. "This ship is small and there aren't many people to talk to. It creates a kind of loneliness that I don't have good human words to describe." Sarah understood that Curl was talking about a special kind of homesickness. For Athethrans, being away from their community wasn't just about missing familiar places, it was about missing something their minds needed to stay balanced. "Are the other Athethran students, Darim and Zethla, having the same problems?" Sarah asked. "They have different personalities that help them deal with stress better than mine," Curl said. "They found ways to cope that don't work for me because I'm more sensitive to emotions and feelings." Sarah realized that while Curl was doing well in her studies, she was struggling emotionally in ways that could become serious if not handled properly. Curl, would it help if we scheduled more time to work together in the lab? Sarah suggested. Sometimes having more conversations about research can help with feeling isolated. That would be very nice, Dr. Winters, Curl said. But I don't want to make extra work for you when you're already doing so much. Helping students adjust is part of my job, Sarah assured her. Having more lab time together will help both our research and your experience on the ship. Sarah planned extra laboratory sessions while thinking about how to help an alien student whose emotional needs were very different from human ways of handling stress. Thank you, Dr. Winters, Curl said. Your understanding of Athetheran needs shows the kind of caring that makes it possible for humans and my people to work together. As Curl left for the evening, Sarah realized that teaching students from other planets meant understanding needs that went far beyond just academic lessons. The extra lab time that Sarah arranged with Curl helped both their research and the Yen Athetheran's adjustment to ship life. However, Sarah began noticing small changes in Curl's behavior that suggested deeper problems that their extra time together couldn't completely fix. During their work, Curl was excellent at analysis, but Sarah saw increased worry during crew meetings and social gatherings, showing that her stress was getting worse instead of better. The energy patterns in today's samples suggest that these plants have a ranking system for communication, Curl reported during their afternoon research session. Her special ability to sense emotions was helping them understand plant communities in ways that regular botanical studies couldn't achieve. Can you describe the emotional feelings you get from these plant communities? Sarah asked while writing down Curl's unique contributions to their alien biology research. I sense happiness through connection, Curl said. The individual plants give up their own resources to help the whole community, creating shared wealth that benefits everyone. Curl paused in her analysis, and her face showed the thoughtful look that had become more common in recent weeks. Does observing these community relationships affect your own emotional state? Sarah asked. Sometimes the empathic feelings make me long for the kind of connections that life on this ship can't provide, Curl admitted. Athetheran psychology needs social harmony that's different from human approaches to community interaction. Sarah recognized that Curl was describing homesickness that went beyond simply missing familiar places to include basic psychological needs that weren't being met by current ship social structures. Are you able to maintain good emotional connection with Darum and Zethala during your free time? Sarah asked. Their ways of adapting involve emotional compartmentalization that creates appropriate distance from ship stress, Curl explained. My empathic sensitivity makes such techniques difficult to use successfully. This revealed that the other Athetheran students had developed coping methods that worked for their personality types but weren't suitable for Curl's more sensitive emotional nature. Curl, would it be helpful if I spoke with Captain Rodriguez about arranging additional social activities designed to accommodate Athetheran psychological needs? Sarah offered. Such arrangements might create administrative problems that affect other crew members' established routines, Curl said worriedly. I don't want to impose special requirements that make Athetheran needs seem problematic for ship operations. Sarah understood that Curl was reluctant to request accommodations that might be viewed as evidence that the exchange program was creating operational difficulties rather than contributing to research success. Student welfare is essential to successful educational programs, Sarah said firmly. Requesting appropriate support doesn't mean imposing special requirements. It represents responsible program management. Dr. Winters, your consideration for Athetheran adaptation challenges goes beyond normal professional duties, Curl said gratefully. I appreciate support that extends beyond academic instruction to include personal welfare concerns. During their evening laboratory sessions, Sarah noticed that Curl seemed to relax more completely. Her conversation became less formal and her empathic analyses more detailed and intuitive. The extended interaction appeared to provide social connection that helped stabilize her emotional balance. Tomorrow's schedule includes extended analysis of the symbiotic plant networks, Sarah mentioned while reviewing their research progress. Your empathic insights will be essential for understanding the communication methods that create community relationships. I look forward to continued collaboration that combines human analytical methods with Etherean perceptual capabilities, Curl replied, though Sarah noticed that her expression showed reluctance about returning to her individual quarters after their productive academic interaction. Curl, are you having difficulty with alone time during evening and overnight periods? Sarah asked directly. Etherean psychology finds long isolation challenging, Curl admitted. Evening routines that involve extended periods without social connection create discomfort that affects sleep patterns and emotional stability. This confirmed Sarah's growing suspicion that Curl's adaptation difficulties were most severe during overnight hours when ship routine left all crew members isolated in individual quarters. Would it be helpful to arrange evening communication sessions with the other Etherean students to provide social connection during typically isolated periods? Sarah suggested. Darum and Zethla have established meditation routines that require privacy for successful implementation, Curl said. Additional social interaction might disrupt their effective adaptation strategies. Sarah realized that Curl was reluctant to seek support from her fellow students, either because their coping methods weren't compatible with her needs or because she didn't want to compromise their successful adjustment by introducing her own psychological challenges. Are there other approaches to evening social support that might help with isolation-related stress? Sarah asked. Dr. Winters, your willingness to consider Etherean psychological requirements shows exceptional cultural sensitivity, Curl said. I don't want to create additional obligations for human crew members who already provide comprehensive educational support. As their session ended and Curl prepared to return to her quarters, Sarah could see the subtle tension that characterized her departure for solitary evening routines that clearly created significant psychological discomfort. Zethela's response was similarly confident. Solitary contemplation. Oh, the dangerous solar storm that forced the New Horizon into extended isolation protocols came without warning. All crew members had to stay locked in their individual quarters for 72 hours while the ship's special shielding protected against deadly radiation levels. Captain Rodriguez announced the emergency procedures with professional calm, though everyone understood that long isolation would create psychological challenges for the mixed human-alien crew. All personnel will remain in designated quarters until radiation levels return to safe parameters, the captain's voice announced for shipwide communication systems. Emergency protocols are in effect. Regular communication between quarters is authorized, though physical movement through ship corridors is prohibited until further notice. Sarah settled into her quarters while thinking about how the isolation period would affect the Etherean students, particularly Curl, whose adaptation difficulties had become increasingly apparent during recent weeks. She activated her communication console to check on all three exchange students, beginning with Darum and Zethela. Isolation protocols present adaptation challenges, but meditation techniques provide adequate emotional stabilization, Darum reported when Sarah contacted the older Etherean student. Emergency procedures are manageable with appropriate psychological preparation. Furs opportunities for spiritual development that compensate for temporary social restriction. Emergency isolation creates acceptable conditions for personal growth. Both students seem to be managing the situation with the emotional strength that had characterized their successful adaptation to human ship life. However, when Sarah contacted Curl, the response revealed significantly greater distress. Dr. Winters, Curl's voice carried strain that was immediately obvious despite the communication system's audio compression. The isolation requirements create difficulty for psychological balance maintenance. Can you describe the specific challenges you're experiencing? Sarah asked with concern. Ethetheran empathic abilities require social connection for emotional regulation, Curl explained. Extended periods without physical proximity to other beings create disorientation that affects cognitive function and emotional stability. Sarah realized that Curl's empathic sensitivity was making the isolation period far more challenging for her than for the other Ethetheran students, whose different personality types had developed more effective methods for managing temporary separation. Are there meditation or mental exercises that might help manage the psychological stress? Sarah asked. Such techniques require training that I haven't received, Curl said. My empathic sensitivity makes solitary emotional regulation very difficult without appropriate preparation. The conversation continued for an hour with Sarah providing virtual support through extended academic discussion about their research projects, though she could hear increasing strain in Curl's responses as the isolation period progressed. Dr. Winters, I'm grateful for communication that provides connection during emergency procedures, Curl said. However, virtual interaction cannot substitute for empathic contact that Ethetheran psychology requires during stress situations. What kind of empathic contact do you normally seek when experiencing this level of psychological difficulty? Sarah asked. Physical proximity to trusted individuals provides empathic grounding that stabilizes emotional responses, Curl explained. Ethetheran communities maintain support networks that offer such connection during times of crisis or unusual stress. Sarah understood that Curl was describing psychological needs that the ship's emergency protocols couldn't accommodate, creating a crisis where safety requirements conflicted with basic emotional stability for empathically sensitive species. Curl, are you able to maintain adequate psychological balance through communication-based interaction until isolation protocols are lifted? Sarah asked. I'm uncertain, Dr. Winters, Curl said with growing distress. The empathic disorientation is increasing rather than stabilizing as the isolation period continues. I fear that extended separation may create psychological crisis that affects my ability to function normally. The admission revealed that Curl was approaching a breaking point where her species' psychological requirements conflicted dangerously with human emergency procedures designed for beings whose emotional needs operated differently. Would it be helpful if I maintained continuous communication contact throughout the isolation period? Sarah offered. Your support provides significant assistance, Curl said, though virtual interaction cannot address the fundamental empathic disconnection that creates psychological instability. I don't want to impose unreasonable demands on your time and energy. Sarah spent the next 12 hours in frequent communication with Curl, providing academic discussion and emotional support that helped maintain some psychological stability, though she could hear deteriorating emotional balance despite their extended virtual interaction. By the beginning of the second night, Curl's distress had escalated to levels that suggested genuine psychological crisis requiring intervention beyond communication-based support system. The soft knocking at Sarah's quarters came at 2:37 in the morning, barely heard above the ship's environmental systems, but persistent enough to wake her from restless sleep. She activated the door's communication panel to find Curl standing in the corridor, her silver-tinted skin pale with distress and her normally composed expression showing signs of genuine psychological crisis. Dr. Winters, Curl whispered, her voice fragile and barely carrying across the small space between them. I apologize for violating isolation protocols, but the empathic disconnection has become unbearable. Sarah could see immediately that the young Ethetheran was experiencing severe psychological distress, trembling that affected her normally graceful movements, disorientation that made her appear uncertain about her surroundings, and emotional strain that transcended cultural differences in expressing vulnerability. Curl, come inside, Sarah said without hesitation, recognizing that emergency situations required flexibility in protocol adherence when student welfare was at stake. I know that human customs regarding personal space operate differently from Athetheran approaches to comfort and support, Curl continued as she entered the quarters, her words carefully chosen despite obvious distress. However, my psychological condition has deteriorated to levels that require physical proximity for empathic stabilization. Sarah guided Curl to the small seating area while assessing the severity of her condition. The young Athetheran's empathic sensitivity had clearly been overwhelmed by prolonged isolation, creating anxiety that manifested in physical symptoms indicating serious psychological crisis. What do you need from me to help stabilize your emotional balance? Sarah asked gently. Can I sleep beside you tonight? Curl asked with desperate honesty that cut through formal politeness. My people cannot endure alone when fear comes. Physical presence of trusted individuals provides empathic grounding that stabilizes psychological responses during crisis situations. The request reflected Athetheran cultural practices that Sarah understood intellectually but had never needed to accommodate practically. She realized that appropriate response required understanding alien emotional needs rather than imposing human social norms on a student whose well-being depended on receiving support that her biology demanded. Of course, Curl, Sarah said without hesitation. I'll arrange sleeping accommodation that provides the empathic contact you need while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Sarah reconfigured her quarters furniture to create separate sleeping areas that allowed physical proximity without compromising professional relationships, understanding that Athetheran requirements for comforting presence operated differently from human concepts of personal space and privacy. Dr. Winters, I'm deeply grateful for accommodation that transcends normal professional obligations, Curl said as they settled into the modified sleeping arrangement. Your willingness to adapt human protocols to address Athetheran psychological needs shows exceptional cultural sensitivity. Student welfare takes priority over standard procedures when those procedures conflict with basic psychological requirements, Sarah replied while adjusting room lighting to levels that accommodated Athetheran visual preferences. May I explain the empathic grounding process so you understand what occurs during Athetheran proximity-based comfort? Curl asked while positioning herself within empathic range but maintaining respectful physical distance. Please do, Sarah said. Understanding the psychological mechanisms will help me provide appropriate support. Athetheran empathic abilities allow us to sense emotional states of nearby individuals, Curl explained. When experiencing psychological crisis, proximity to stable, caring presences provides emotional anchoring that helps regulate our own psychological responses. Sarah felt a subtle warmth as Curl's empathic abilities created connection between them. The sensation was comforting rather than intrusive, providing emotional support that operated through species-specific psychological mechanisms. Is this level of proximity sufficient for the empathic grounding you require? Sarah asked. Yes, Dr. Winters, Curl said with obvious relief. Your emotional stability and genuine concern create empathic environment that allows my psychological balance to begin stabilizing. The crisis feeling is already diminishing through contact with your calm presence. As they settled into sleep, Sarah realized that the night's events had fundamentally changed her understanding of cross-species mentorship, demonstrating that effective support sometimes required abandoning familiar protocols in favor of responses that addressed actual psychological needs. Curl, if similar psychological crises occur in the future, please don't hesitate to seek appropriate support immediately rather than attempting to endure dangerous isolation, Sarah said. Your response tonight creates precedent that will help me seek necessary assistance during future difficulties, Curl replied gratefully. I understand now that appropriate help-seeking represents responsible behavior rather than cultural imposition. The next morning brought official end to isolation protocols, though Sarah and Curl's relationship had deepened through crisis that revealed the importance of flexibility when human procedures conflicted with alien psychological requirements. Dr. Winters, Curl said as they prepared to return to normal ship routines, last night taught me that genuine understanding requires willingness to move beyond cultural assumptions when helping others navigate challenges that transcend species boundaries. For me as well, Curl, Sarah replied. The most important lesson was recognizing that effective mentorship means adapting our responses to accommodate the actual needs of those we're supporting, regardless of whether those needs align with our familiar approaches. Their academic partnership continued with enhanced trust and understanding, while Sarah's willingness to accommodate Athetheran's psychological requirements created new protocols for future interspecies educational programs that prioritize student welfare over administrative convenience. The crisis had shown them both that successful cooperation between different species required not just academic exchange, but deep understanding and flexibility in addressing the fundamental psychological and emotional needs that made each species unique. What had begun as a simple educational exchange had evolved into something far more profound, a genuine friendship that bridged not just cultural differences, but the very different ways that humans and Athetheran's experience connection, comfort, and care. In the months that followed, Curl's academic performance flourished as her emotional stability improved through the support systems they had developed. Other crew members, seeing the success of their flexible approach, began adapting their own interactions with the Athetheran students to better accommodate their unique psychological needs. The New Horizons mission continued its journey through deep space, but now it carried not just the usual cargo of scientific data and research samples. It carried the proof that when different species approached each other with genuine understanding, flexibility, and willingness to adapt their methods to meet actual needs rather than assumed requirements, the resulting partnerships could achieve far more than either species could accomplish alone. Sarah's reports back to the education administrators emphasized that successful interspecies programs required fundamental changes in how humans approached alien psychology and emotional needs. Her recommendations, based on real experience rather than theoretical assumptions, would shape future exchange programs and ensure that other alien students wouldn't face the same isolation and crisis that Curl had endured. The young Athetheran's courage in seeking help when she needed it most, and Sarah's willingness to prioritize student welfare over standard procedures, had created a new model for interspecies education that would benefit students from many different worlds for generations to come.